Morning, Burke. It's 11:20 on the 24th of October 2006, and this is session 49.
Well, here we are. David, thank you for the gift, which is in some way related to what we're doing, is that it has to do with a vacuum. When you push this down, it creates a vacuum and it holds.
It holds.
And we're suggesting that maybe many people are living in a vacuum, and we're trying to open it. Anyway, thank you very much for the present. Dave, we've talked about this before.
Oh, you've rewritten the English alphabet.
And
that's very interesting.
But here we have the Serenity Prayer.
God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference.
Right. And I have to constantly remind myself in what we're doing, because the magnitude of what we're attempting is so tremendous that people have not recognized, and it's one of the intellectual properties that is central to what we're doing. It hasn't been recognized, and I don't quite understand why it hasn't, that any major breakthrough in the field of social science that is of the ilk of E equals mc squared in physics will be tantamount to, or will be, the establishment of a new faith. And with all the resistance and tensions related to that. And I guess if we hadn't encountered the experience ourselves, because I don't know how many people have encountered what is really the equivalent of an E equals mc squared, because once we started talking about the wave, and saw what would happen in a theoretically ideal game of chance, and recognized that we were in that position, I don't know if I really recognized that this was of the ilk of the equals mc squared. And it is in that category. In other words, the discovery of the normal curve and the fact that there is no cause behind it and the related curves is in that category. Now, whether people agree or not is something else. And as we mentioned the other day, we're dividing what we're doing between two things. What would be the consequence of a breakthrough of the magnitude that exists in physics? And then, does it exist? The consequence, I think we can get a fairly good agreement on that, and it should be done in fiction, science fiction. Whether we can get agreement on it actually occurring is something else, because it's so unattractive. I'm personally convinced the evidence is overwhelming, and if I have to make a choice in how I make my decisions, I'm going to make the choice based on the evidence rather than what my senses tell me. So I want to emphasize this, and I want
Could you put that up just for a second, just to repeat here? What has happened is you have substituted for the letter G, the epiphany, you've substituted that epiphany for the letter E, I guess,
Yes.
if it's rotated the other way.
Yes.
And the dollar sign for the letter S.
Yes.
And the frequency of occurrence of those three items is quite surprising. It slows down one's reading.
But it doesn't prohibit it.
No, it doesn't prohibit it, and of course it's thought-provoking.
Yes. Well,
Yeah.
Well, before I go on, then I'll mention the significance of this. That the significance is that if we're dealing with a faith, and central to any faith are the dominant icons, and we've mentioned Geertz's definition of religion a number of times, that I think it doesn't take too much imagination to recognize that without the dominant icons, the faith does not take hold. You need the constant reminder, you need the protection against uncertainty, you need this implicit faith that gives you this degree of security So if in essence what we're saying is that science is just another faith, and once one recognizes our personal shortcomings, that anything that we're looking at is a matter of faith. Our perceptual systems are so limited, our ability to handle complexity is so limited, that the degree of conviction we will have on certain things are completely misplaced. So what would happen? How in the world would you ever establish an icon or icons in the field of science that could anywhere match the power of the major icons or symbols of the major religions to control the perceptions, thoughts, actions, and emotions of man? So by chance we've come up with the Epiphany, and it in turn has that potential. Whether it will reach the potential is something else. And I'm hypothesizing that if the richest people in the world proclaim that inherent in this icon is the secret to wealth, if people go behind the meaning. Now, in essence, I find it really quite intriguing, and I'm repeating again, Nokamo, as we did last time. But here, within this symbol, we have numbers represented by letters. We have E, we have pi, we have I, we have the numeral 1 in two different forms. We could take it as the lowercase number one for the Roman or the uppercase. And in turn, we have phi, represented artistically, and we have 0. And if we turn it over, if I got it the right way for you, we have G and an exclamation mark for aha. We also have inherent in it emotion, represented by E, and in turn we have intelligence, emotional intelligence, because this has been underplayed. EI. Those of another faith, we have the Hebrew Chai, which is 18 and is good luck. Inherent.
Now, the exclamation mark is actually on this side, is it not?
The exclamation mark is on the other side, because an exclamation mark is
oh, yes, yes. Right, correct.
All right?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
You're the one who brought to
No, I didn't notice that one.
Yeah.
That was very good.
You brought to my attention the fact that we had the Roman numeral, because we have to have 1 and 0, and this emanated from Euler's equation. But inherent in this are numbers that are miracles, because these numbers, having been discovered, have led to the modern world. And if these numbers were not discovered, if in fact I would love to run an essay contest on two types of essays. One with this regard to the best essay that would describe how the world would be if these numbers were not discovered. I think that many people who take them for granted would be completely surprised. The other essay I would like to relate to the causal, and particularly the normal curve, and not that other curves aren't important, but how the world would appear today if, again, that curve hadn't been discovered. And again, I think people will be amazed at how different our world would be. Another essay question could be, compare the significance to the world of the circle and the normal curve. Now, how do we get on this? The point is that we have something here. We're talking about things we can't change, but we have a possibility, if that icon was raised to the level it could be raised to, that it would have a major contribution to enhancing scientific and quantitative and stochastic literacy. And basically. That's, I wanted to lead into, on January the 17th, thanks to you again, I felt quite stuck, and you encouraged me to have one of your huddles, which you were good enough to.
This was last year.
This is this year, wasn't it?
In 2006, was it?
Yeah, January 17,
January?
2006. And you asked me to describe, as you usually do, success.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to repeat it
Sure.
because a lot has happened since that time. But it's still, I'm thrilled that
What's the time frame there?
it was January 17, 2006, and you said the description of success, January 17, 2007.
1 year. So
1 year?
yeah, we're 3/4 of the way there.
Right.
Okay.
Now, I'm thrilled that this project does not require my participation.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. 2, the people like the founders of eBay, Google, Warren Buffett, Bill Gates, George Lucas, Steven Spielberg, all of whom have experienced memes, have taken on the responsibility for the project in total. 3, I'm thrilled that the management problem necessary to attract these people has been solved, and I enjoy those implementing, and they have overcome my bachelorhood. 4, I'm ecstatic that there is a way that my family, those I love and those I am close to, have found a way to profit from this project. 5, I've enjoyed the role of mentor and conveying the information to others and still spending a day as I prefer to spend it. 6, I'm very pleased that others have recognized that we're dealing with a project that is in essence the psychology of religion as it applies to science and to mathematics. 7, I'm thrilled that we have attracted people of the ilk of Nobel Prize winners who have lent their reputation to the credibility of what we have accomplished. 8, I'm pleased that we have involved AAAS Project 2061, No Child Left Behind, and other ways to reach children. 9, the greatest relief I have is that I'm sitting in this room and I have no obligation whatsoever. 10, I'm very pleased to have made a contribution. 11, everyone involved in this enjoys participation in royalties of 5% of sales, and we have an advance royalty payment of $2 million.
Well, that's pretty good.
And things really, as far as that dream,
we're moving in that direction.
We're moving in that direction, but it really hasn't changed very much, except that there have been some exciting developments, and I don't know whether we enumerate all of them, but
well, what's the most exciting? Pick.
Well, I think the most exciting and most concrete is that since this subject matter is one of the characteristics of this subject matter, it's extremely difficult to control my own behavior. It crosses all disciplines. There's hardly a discipline that's not. Mm-hmm. The information is overwhelming. There's too much and yet there's not enough. The interface with too many people, it's unmanageable. So what I think are the major advances is I've pinned it down to 4 relatively concrete intellectual properties that are available to my senses. I can touch it, I can see it, I can bite it, I can smell it, and this did not exist when we had it, and this is extremely central because if someone says, "What are you doing?" instead of a lot of verbiage, which is inevitable, I can hold this up.
Yes, right. Very good.
Now, also, the coin was not in existence.
So you have the prototype of the coin.
The coin. Now, the coin is in the same category, and the coin is, in some respects, even easier to understand. Again, I'll just have to lean up here for a moment. The coin is again concrete and easier to understand because we have a precedent. Here we have the first coin with moving parts. Should have called it a levy. Anyway, a levy instead of a coin.
Oh.
Anyway, it has the first coin with moving parts, and it looks like it will sell at least $10 million
Yes.
in volume. Well, so with that precedent, gives a great deal of confidence that a coin such as we have here has the same dollar potential. If we forget our mission
Yes.
in total, instead we're concentrating on one business deal that's going to make a contribution, which is really quite possible to do,
Yes.
is we focus on this coin, even perhaps more so than the Epiphany, in that it's possible to put together a business plan that could show the issuance, say, of at least 10 commemorative coins, each having $10 million in value, and that would be $100 million in volume, and to enjoy 5% royalty is not out of the question. There's a great deal of implementation, but that's tangible. The other two relatively tangible things relate to what you're doing, because that's a great relief. I was concerned that the complexity of what we're doing is such that it wouldn't get done, and
We get lost.
it can get lost. Meanwhile, because you've been good enough to insist and take your time and participate with these videos, at least there is a record for others to continue, and also at the same time it helps those who are related to me to understand me and understand perhaps some of the things that are in their genes. So that is a very, very major, perhaps I would put it at the top of the list, because it's tangible, it's there, it's done, and it answers the question, Zadie, haven't you learned anything in your lifetime you want us to know so we don't have to spend a lifetime relearning it? Well, the answer is here.
Yes.
You might have to dig to get it, but it basic's there, so that mission is accomplished. When I set that question, I didn't expect it would evolve into these major other projects that go far beyond answering the question, but facilitate the understanding. Now, the other thing is the parables. This must be approached as science fiction. I say must always when I am definite like that. There's always some doubt, but it's easier to say must.
Well, that's a recommendation.
But it should be approached as science fiction, because what is missing in the solution to a problem is the identification of the problem and the definition of the problem. And the fact that no one has really written any science fiction relating to the possible characteristic of a breakthrough in social science to emulate the breakthroughs in physics, and what would be the possible consequences, that's extremely valuable. So we, again, from what we're talking about, some of it is here, some of it is outlined briefly in some of the correspondence, and focusing on that and recognizing that we're dealing with fiction and we should put fiction up at the top has precipitated my contacting Philip Ball. Luckily enough, because of something I was doing this week, I found that the PhD drama division of the University of Toronto that could be possibly of help.
Yes.
Also, I've got John Casty's work pertaining to the use of fiction, and of course Jim Brown's work at the University of Toronto on thought experiments. So there's a great deal of people who I feel comfortable with.
And June Engel you contacted?
And I've contacted June Engel. So I think by working on fiction, this is, and working towards the fiction, it places these things in terms of the Serenity Prayer in a more reasonable way, because the fiction's there, and if it happens to go beyond fiction, all well and good. Of course, I expect it to do so. Also, on the tape, and in a way my autobiography, is I've been living the parable, and you've been living the parable. So I think those are the concrete things that have happened. So where I was unsettled and didn't know where I'm going, because if we go back to the huddle and the technique you use, and we started listing the problems, which are still here, but nevertheless, we've made a substantial move forward. Financial business, that's one category. The business case plan, there's a lack of clear value proposition to this consumer. Well, that is clarified, if nothing more, on the coin, right? Why would someone pay for it? Well, the coin particularly. Not only that, we didn't have the it, but the epiphany represents a brand. It's aesthetically pleasing. If someone wanted to create a product line with that brand, it stands on its own whether it has any relationship to what we're doing or not. So it has brand value. It has more brand value in the purpose we have, but it has brand value on its own. It's difficult for me to separate the need to get the concept of the causal across and the tangible, the coin. Well, again, by focusing on the four tangibles that I'd written to Julian Stubbs. And that's another thing that was a major step forward. By
You'd mentioned AAAS, but I don't think you knew of Stubbs at the time.
No, I didn't.
Yes.
What had happened with AAAS is their format began to change in a much more attractive manner. And then all of a sudden...
Their advertising, you mean?
Their advertising, their format of the science magazine.
Yes.
Their whole approach had...
Did that trigger your
that,
inquiry?
That plus Alan Leshner in one editorial, who's the executive director, said that they were working on something like this, and I got in touch with him, and he wasn't very illuminating because he didn't understand quite himself, but that caused me to chase down who's responsible for it. And what motivated me most was just the ingenious thing of what I'd shown.
The baby scientist.
The baby scientist.
Yeah, which is baby Einstein, but they don't call it
no.
that. Yeah.
So I thought anybody who could come up with that would be, and I found rapport with Julian the moment I spoke to him. So that
big step forward.
That's a big step forward. How difficulty for me to separate the need to get the concept of the causal across to the and the tangible, and that's making progress, because by putting myself in an environment of another brand manager, we tried it before, but we've got a brand manager who has an obligation to science. The one we did before with Ian, who was a wonderful guy, he did not have the background. Julian, it doesn't have the math background, but we're attracted.
But he's got the client.
He's got the client, and he's got the interest, because if we have time today, I'll refer to the correspondence that's going on with him. Then how do you bring all these things to fruition? The concept is an obstacle, because we've talked about this. We want every member of a society to get something out of this. 3, we do not have a lucid statement of what this is, which we need before we can approach Warren Buffett, the Warren Buffetts of this world. Well, again, I was thinking this morning, and also in what I'd written, Julie, I really do want to get this thing away from me. Now, let's talk about that a bit.
Let's go back to Warren Buffett for a minute. On January 17th, 2006, we had no idea that Buffett would leave the bulk of his estate to the Gates Foundation.
No.
That's a significant step
Not
towards...
only that, since that time, because of, again, a coincidence, I met Michnia Moldovino from the University of Toronto, a young man who is truly brilliant, is in the Rotman facility. He brought Charles Munger to my attention. Charles Munger is one of Warren Buffett's best friends. So not does only Warren Buffett have the background to comprehend this, Charles Munger has even more background. I had no way of knowing that.
Yes, rather serendipitous. A few things have fallen into place like that, yes.
Yeah, well, I found continuously, if you have a dream, even if the dream isn't clear enough, but if it's a dream and you're emotionally dedicated to it, things just seem to happen.
The Power of Impossible Thinking.
Yeah.
The title of the book you have here.
Right.
Yeah, very good. The other thing, of course, just quickly, you might mention how the Epiphany itself fell into place. That it was rather magical, and it was also after
Yes.
January 17th.
Now we have it on the tape before, but I can repeat it. If
Well,
you
it's really just the contribution from John Langford.
John Langdon.
Langdon.
Well,
yes.
what intrigued me is the role of my grandchildren in this. My adopted grandchild, Salida, who gave her brother and sister the Da Vinci Code. Now here we have two bright youngsters who I would never have predicted would be interested at their stage in life in the Da Vinci Code. Quite wrong. Quite
Aged what?
at the time they read it, I guess it would be 13 and 15, right? Both read it, both separately and unknown to each other. Tallel first and then Benja wrote me an email saying, "Grandpa, does phi have anything to do with what you're trying to teach us?" And of course it does.
Big time.
It does. I mean, I was just thrilled. I mean, I had never talked to them about phi. The fact that they made that intellectual jump just thrilled me. Now, that precipitated, because I had taken Euler's equation, which we mentioned before.
Yes.
And
E raised to the power of pi I equals -1.
yes.
That's Euler's equation.
And I had taken that equation, and I had inserted, this is now in the 80s, early 80s, I inserted phi into that equation because I was intrigued. I mean, phi is amazing to me. The fact that it's the only number in the world where the square of the number is equal to the number plus 1, and the reciprocal of the number is equal to the number minus 1, it intrigued me. And here, so we have Euler's equation, which creates a response in many mathematicians comparable to what the response is to a religious symbol. And yet you could put and each of the numbers within Euler's equation separately create what we refer to as a Geertz response, like a religious symbol. E on its own, pi, I, 0, 1, even plus and equal. So by putting phi into that equation, which I did in this manner, I had e raised to the power of pi I plus phi squared minus phi was equal to 0. And I had Ellen Stock make up a gold pin for me. And what was the reason for making up the gold pin? Was that AAAS was meeting in Toronto, and since I had so much trouble other than with our conversation meeting anybody who I could talk to about this thing, I felt that if I wore the pin to the conference and anybody saw it and laughed, because who would think of putting phi into that equation?
Yeah, you'd find a kindred spirit.
I'd find a kindred spirit. And it's intriguing because I had a goal. I knew I couldn't spend too much time meeting too many people, but I knew there were two people I did want to meet who would be there. One was Ken Boulding, whose work I hold in the highest esteem, and Ken was the past president, I think, of AAAS. Certainly was one of the founders with Anatol of the General Systems movement. And Fred Mosteller, who was the past head of the American Statistical Association and who was dedicated to education in terms of youngsters understanding this area, and I think was the incoming president, I'm not sure. But so I wore that gold pin, and as luck again would have it, when I entered the facility and I saw Boulding, because I knew what he looked like, I went over to introduce myself, and I said...
You're holding something similar to
well,
the pin.
I'll come to
not
that.
The same one, right?
Yeah. I said, Professor Boulding, my name is Burke Brown. He said, he started laughing. He said, let's have lunch.
Because he saw
he saw the
equation.
Yeah. And during the conversation with him at lunch, he said, I think you should meet Fred Mosteller. And I met him. So I had that pin. And by the way, at that conference is when I first started having conversations with Tuzo Wilson that led to forming Friends of Science at the Ontario Science Centre.
Mm.
The intention was to form a Canadian counterpart of AAAS. We couldn't get consensus of the scientists were there. There was too much nationalism. It was a bad decision on their part, so we tried to form a comparable organization and made reasonable progress until until Tuzo had to retire and died. Well, about a year and a half ago, maybe longer now, I was wearing this pin in Calgary when I went to visit Anthony, and unfortunately I lost it.
Mm.
It's an expensive pin. It's gold.
Mm.
I was, disappointed, but I could get it made up again. And I came and asked another jeweler rather than Ellen to make it up, and he kept on dragging his feet, and almost a year or more. And then when the kids came and asked the question, I said, aha, we're going to change the equation, because now I have phi, which is known as the golden number, the golden ratio. I can put phi is equal to phi squared plus e raised to the power of pi I, or I pi. Now, it's highly unusual to see something in the singular, phi, is equal to its square plus something else,
Right.
that alone. So I made up this pin.
Yeah, yes, very good. Yeah, phi equals phi squared plus e raised to the power of pi I.
Right?
Yeah.
And
That's a mathematical joke in a sense too, but
it is.
it's quite amazing.
Now,
Now that gave rise, did it not, to the epiphany?
it did. I'll go into that. But now,
Yeah.
many mathematicians will not find that aesthetically pleasing, because it's an illustration of aesthetics, because it repeats phi
Yes.
and such. But nevertheless, there's a message within this. So I created this and went, and I didn't put two and two together until Benja brought it to my attention that,
Well, Benja mentioned Langdon to you.
well, what had happened, he said, look, he said, Grandpa, I found this wonderful word play, or was it?
Wordplay was the book. Yeah.
By John Langdon on the site, and I said, well, I know John, but I didn't know that John had done the artwork for the previous book, The Angels and Demons. I didn't know that.
Mm-hmm.
And another thing is, when I was reading the Da Vinci Code, I never put two and two together with regard to Robert and John.
Yeah, Robert. Yeah.
And it's because of John's devotion and brilliance in typography that the hero, Robert Langdon, was named after John.
Yeah.
So I thought that the movie hadn't come out yet, and because the abstract nature of this whole project, and that there was a real chance that the Da Vinci Code could do a great deal for mathematics,
Mm-hmm.
because it introduces a whole world, the phi, the Fibonacci series, the pentagram or pentacle, and it potentially, because of the success. Now, unfortunately, because of the way it's done, and the mathematicians haven't taken advantage of it, it hasn't been mined the way it could have, because it could have really moved mathematics ahead as far as
So
popularization.
what was your intention, or what were you trying to do?
Well, so what I thought, since you have literary license when you're making the movie, wouldn't it be something if the golden equation came to the forefront
Mm-hmm.
within the story? Wouldn't have been much, and I think I could have raised money for the extra cost involved,
Mm-hmm.
because of Jeff Skoll's participation film company, and Skoll is one of the founders of eBay, that he formed this company in order to do well by doing good. So I knew that after I investigated, I knew that John was very friendly with Dick Brown and Dan, but particularly Dick, because Dan got to John through Dick. Dick became agreed with John's work. So I felt that if I sent it down and I made the suggestion that he show the equation to Dick, that it would light a fire and he could talk to Dan about it. Well, that didn't succeed. First of all, John didn't get it, and in transferring it, he didn't transfer it, of course, as I would. And even when I had an opportunity through John to clarify, it's still, Dick as an educator did not get it. And although I'll paraphrase, he didn't say it this way, but basically he's saying anytime he looks at Euler's equation in the future, he will not be able to forget Burke Brown. So, he says, it's nothing great about it or anything. It's nothing insightful or anything like that. He completely missed the pedagogical value. But John, being what he's like, and an expert in typography, came back with a suggestion, close, but not close enough.
Putting all the symbols into one design.
Into one, and that was brilliant. That was brilliant. He didn't ask for payment, but I paid him, and he wanted to have a participation in any revenue, 10% of whatever I would receive. So I wrote back and I said, this is wonderful, but it's not what I want. I want it so it can emulate a Greek letter society.
So he did it with letters that were basically sans serif, not in the format of Greek letters,
No.
which is what you asked him to do.
Because once I saw that, I could see that we had the beginnings of a society similar to Sigma Xi that everybody could belong to, and it would not be an elite society.
Burke, probably the most significant event of this year. A lot of other things accomplished, but that rather serendipitous event and John's contributions is probably the most important thing.
Well, it's the most important in fact that if you have a faith and it's missing the essential ingredient to make it an effective faith, how often will you ever know the genesis of a religious symbol? So we have both in the Epiphany coin, in the causal coin, and within the Epiphany, we have that potential. And this is again why it's well to deal with fiction, because to assert this, its only future will determine whether it has that power or not.
Yeah.
But in fiction, we can give it that power. When Mr. E, I don't know what we're going to call it.
Mystery.
I would like to have it female, but if I do it a female, it's misery. So, and I don't want that. So, but if I could have made it female, but when Mr. E, who travels from causal land to acausal land, and he's going to be in a bit better position than the square when the square went to sphere land.
What's wrong with Miss E?
Well, I'm just worried that Miss E might again, somebody might get to misery.
The wrong connotation. Missy,
Yeah.
Missy, not misery.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Well,
go ahead.
I like Mr. E.
Yes.
I just wish it was female, because I think women have a great role to play in this.
Yes, of course.
But so what can happen when you talk about the validity in the fiction, when Mr. E comes back from a causal land and he's trying to convince his colleagues that there is another dimension, that where causality is not the way in which we see it here, and it's important the way in which we lead our lives, he comes back with several things. He comes back with their symbol, which he says is their dominant symbol. He comes back with their coinage, because they not worship but close to it, the discovery.
They revere it.
They revere that curve.
Yes.
And they come back, and he shows how this is in their alphabet, right? And he comes back also with the binary alphabet, because in the genesis of their alphabet, this preceded the fact that they then developed a binary alphabet that shows that all of us are related, because all the languages are in the binary alphabet. So it all can emanate from this science fiction
Yes.
story, which puts forth the hypothesis of everything we have in mind, but in a manner that's entertainment and people can take it or leave it.
That's threatening. Sure.
So continuing, John, I asked him because I could see that we could create a fraternal or sorority or a society, an educational society, and it's best to deal with what's already established is the use of the Greek lettering because they're known as Greek societies. So I thought, well, gee, we can form EI Pi Phi.
Mm-hmm.
And in turn, so I asked him to do it, and he came back with a small change. He says, can't do it, Burke, it's not aesthetically pleasing, and he was busy. And so fortunately, again, because of luck, I have this relationship with Philip Poisson, and I asked Philip if he could do it. And Philip said, yes, I think I can. And then we had a number of iterations of different ways.
Yeah, slight changes.
Well, the genesis of it is quite interesting, because Philip did it one way, and he said, no, I don't like that. Then he did another way, and no, not quite. And then he did another way. I said, well, it's not bad. And then Philip kept on saying, he's troubled. And he says, what's troubling him? Well, the I made it, there was something wrong with the I.
Mm-hmm.
And in turn, he knew in his gut that there's something wrong with the I. Until he had again the epiphany, if I make the I negative, right?
Mm-hmm.
So then he made it negative, and we went through several iterations again because it wasn't right, until I saw this. I said, that's it.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, that
So all the letters there are positive. The I is negative, cut out of the rest of the piece.
But
that was a breakthrough.
But what is again coincidental, that I refers to a negative number.
Mm-hmm.
It refers to the square root of -1.
Of course. It's
so
negative.
Again, serendipity.
Yeah, excellent. Very good.
Comes in there.
Mm-hmm.
So Philip did it. Now I haven't gone back to John. I was waiting until I have the Epiphany site. I want to go further with this, further developed. So I want to send him a sample, but I'd like him to be able to look at the site so he can grasp all the reasoning.
The purpose, yes. Sure.
Behind this.
Yeah.
Now you came up one day and you said, Unc, EI Epiphany, and reminds me of Epiphany. And then of course you set my mind to going, and I started writing it out, and then I saw if I put it in a certain sequence, I can misspell epiphany, but it can be a new word standing for a mathematical epiphany. So I first of all created a site, eipiphi.org, and then I changed it to epiphany.org, and we now what had happened at the same time, concurrent, these are why one person can take credit for things.
Yeah.
At the same time, Philip said to me, Burke, we've got to call this thing something. Well, you had already planted the seed, epiphany, spelt, and then when I started writing it out, I said, Philip, we're going to call it the Epiphany. And that's the
Voila.
bird. Now, it's an interesting story on its own, whether this ever comes into existence or not. I don't know whether I should continue here on the... I'll continue on the negatives. We do not have a lucid statement of what this is, which we need before we can approach the Warren Buffett of this world. Now we're getting there. What I've been writing by getting a brand manager and putting myself in a position where I'm conversing with a brand manager. Now I've identified someone who has all the intellectual background and is an expert in this field pertaining to econophysics and such and many other things, but is also interested in drama.
Yes, and who's that?
That's Philip Ball. So by being disciplined to write Philip, it helps. So I've got a brand manager who I wrote one way. I've got a person who has the intellectual background and and knows the use of fiction in science, or not only knows, but
He has done it. He's done it.
done it, but is very much in favor of it.
Mm-hmm.
So that again, I've started, and that helps if we still don't get responses in clarifying. We're getting a much more lucid statement.
Mm-hmm.
We do not have a 150-word summary statement of what this is all about. The elevator pitch is missing. Well, in a way, we're getting very close to the elevator pitch.
Mm-hmm.
When I have this, someone says, well, you have to be a special person. But if they said, what's that? I said, this is to science and mathematics what the cross is to Christianity.
Mm-hmm.
If you're a certain person, that can be a turn on.
Mm-hmm.
If similarly, in an elevator pitch, what's this?
It's a $100 million project.
It's a $100 million project, but more importantly, it is a way of introducing a subject matter to children from the day they're born, and would permeate every course in statistics and probability in the world.
Mm-hmm.
So those things did not exist. Right? I think there's an enormous amount of work in answering the 7 hows and 1 who for each of the projects, and I do not look forward to working on them. Well, there may very well be, but I have answered in a very rough sec, because it's the easiest, the 7 hows and 1 who on the coin.
Yes.
Okay.
You just did that recently.
Yes.
Okay.
It went to Julian's stuff.
Yeah, very good.
Management. I have great confidence in myself as a financial intermediary, but not as a principal or client, both of which I am in this situation. That still remains. Mm-hmm. It's a shortcoming, which if we have time, I'll talk about some more. Shovel money. I do not have the discretionary capital to finance these projects and provide shovel money. Now I have, and I'm obviously spending shovel money to get in the position to raise more shovel money, but nevertheless, all right. Mm-hmm. Strategy. One of my options might be to give these projects away, but I'm deterred by my desire to have my family and associates benefit. I still would give it away, David, mm-hmm. and just leave it to the Gates people and such decide. Cultural and philosophical and external. I do not know who else in the world is totally on the same wavelength. Material change there. In the conference in 205 that I, of course, only found out about on the econophysics of wealth distributions, means that finally there is a whole host of people. Philip Ball's book on critical mass, and more importantly, in some respects, the recent article on zero-based intelligence means that if somebody says, what are you doing? I can say, read this, and if you understand this, we can carry on a conversation.
And those endeavors produce contacts with people who are interested in the field.
It does, but it also increases the work, the complexity.
Yeah, sure.
I go to write a letter that I think will take 15 minutes, and 3.5 hours or 6 hours later, I'm through with it. All right, let's see. I do not know who though I got that one. So that's been a material change since we wrote it. As a Skinnerian psychologist, the environment is not structured in such a way to be conducive to learning, and quite to the contrary, the punishment is too far removed from encouraging the proper act, and that still exists. But you can, in the fiction, bring this to the surface. Personal internal health. I have health warnings that are worrying me about doing any of this, and that still exists. Personal psychology in Pisces. This is, I guess, fishy. Immediately relevant to moving forward. I have great confidence in myself as a financial intermediary, but not as a principal. I have difficulty separating the philosophical and the practical. Well, I'm getting a bit closer on that. I don't want to play the role that I used to play, but I don't want to give up the potential financial rewards prematurely. I'm quite prepared to give up. The whole situation is far too complex for my mind and my level of energy and health. I feel trapped. I'm telling myself that I can't leave it. I believe it is my obligation to my family and extended family to proceed with these projects no matter the consequences on me. I'm still in that position. Now I could go on rather, I think, than I don't know. Wait a minute. I'll see if I. Well, it's all relevant. What should we do?
Well, we have about 10 minutes left.
No,
Your
then
choice.
I don't think so.
Okay.
What I want to do.
Could I just raise a quick point?
Yes.
This quotation from Dan Brown
Yes.
is relevant. Perhaps you just mentioned briefly. The work on econophysics is questioning the fundamental assumptions of traditional economics.
Yes.
Perhaps you could read.
No, you read it and then I'll comment.
So I found this in Deception Point, a book written by Dan Brown, on page 497 of the paperback. The quotation is, hierarchical evidence is a house of cards. Pull out your primary assumption and everything gets shaky. And I think that's an example of what is likely to happen.
Well,
when you look at the contributions, your contribution, the work in econophysics, and the fundamental assumptions holding up modern economic theory as a house of cards.
You're right on, David. We're dealing, and economists know this, the Achilles heel in economics, there are a number of Achilles heel, but one of it is the assumption of rational man.
Mm-hmm.
And we know that that isn't so. And so you have the basis of failure built into economics based on that assumption alone.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't mean that economics hasn't had some contribution. But we have a paradoxical situation that has come to the forefront because of econophysics, but not only this has been gestating ever since 1733.
Mm-hmm.
But what it is this, and it comes up particularly, and this is why this article in this whole area that they've given the nomenclature, pardon me for a minute, they've given the nomenclature, the predictive power of zero intelligence
Mm-hmm.
in financial markets.
Mm-hmm.
Okay?
Yeah.
Now, what do they mean by that, and what is the significance to what the quotation that you've just read? There's here we have, you decided to come here. I decided to agree to interview. Every which way we turn, we are making decisions. So it's very difficult for us to perceive ourselves as particles. Yet,
Particles being bumped around.
Yeah, but
Mm-hmm.
as in the case of Einstein, where he changed his frame of reference in his famous thought experiment when someone's falling, and if there is no reference around him, and a rock is falling or a ball is falling at the same time, that person does not know he's falling.
Mm-hmm.
An observer does know. So here you have a paradox, and you have another paradox in the wave particle. But you have that paradox. Well, in essence, if we live in a land of causality, but if you had the ability to stand above and watch everything that's happening, then you can recognize that we have all, like a speeded up film, we got all this and there's pattern behind it. So here you have people in causal land making decisions, and people in the causal land looking at it and finding doesn't matter how rational these decisions are, the patterns
Mm-hmm.
all come out the same. I have here, because an excellent background for all of this has to do with social insects.
Mm-hmm.
So a good metaphor or analogy is examining what is being done in computer programming in simulating the movements of these social insects to the point where we can predict their behavior.
Mm-hmm.
So in essence, the researcher is in a causal land, and imagine that that ant was in turn a human individual. Could not is all, and he's interviewed, why are you foraging this way, and what are you doing, and they can give all a rational answer. And all of a sudden he's taken into a causal land where these computer experts are, and he sees this pattern which would be beneficial in helping the whole colony in getting the food, and he goes back. How in the world can he remember? How can he act? How can he control himself?
Mm-hmm.
So what is disturbing is all the literature in econophysics is where you have data, particularly the stock market, is confirming that we act as particles. And I think I did the other day, but I think it's worthwhile repeating here. We take this, let's see. The traditional paradigm in economics is one of rational utility maximizing agents. You know, I want to make a profit and I'm going to do it the best way I can. Recognizing limitations in human cognition, economists have increasingly explored models in which agents have bounded rationality. And that's an invention by a psychologist that I think Herbert Simon lifted from Ashby, where in turn our brain connections cannot deal with the complexity, so we all work on a fiction, models that we believe, which come into what you're talking about, the basic assumption. We take this direction even further here by testing a model of trading in financial markets that drops the agent rationality almost altogether. These results are particularly striking because the model predicts simple quantitative laws relating to different properties of market that are borne out well when tested against data. Right? Now, of course, this is what happened to us. When I said, and I looked at a perfect game where people were making decisions of left and right, this is what happened to me. Because this model, people were making decisions at decision points here. Do I go left? Do I go right? They only see what's here. And then I could watch this happening. So it didn't matter which decisions they made. That pattern still is there.
And the black ball's in a different spot every time.
It's a different spot. It's highly improbably over here, more probable to be in here. So I could visualize what was happening, that what these researchers are talking about. And this is over 40 years ago. The device enabled me to keep that in mind, because once I saw this, I knew how to play the game. Didn't mean I could play it, but this device was essential. The mathematics would have hidden it.
Yes.
And the device was invented to overcome the limitation of mathematics by Galton. So mathematics is fine, but it can also hide things. So what's important here? Well, what's important is that they've tested this theory, like the social ants, and they could predict the buying and selling. And here is in their conclusion, which is rather interesting. How is it conceivable to successfully model a situation in which we know the agents engage in clever strategic behavior in terms of a model that completely neglects this? Perhaps a telephone exchange provides a good analogy. Even though each customer has perfectly good reason for picking up the phone, communication engineers design an exchange by assuming they do so at random. Right? It suggests that institutions strongly shape our behavior so that some of the properties of markets may depend more on the structure of the institutions than on the rationality of the individuals. All right, that is 2005.
Recent.
40. Now, practically, what's happening? So I'm dealing with Alec Bogdan, who credits me, and I don't think it's warranted, for getting him involved in this. But he's using this tendency to trade the market. where these people are doing it academically and coming to the conclusion, he's now spent something like 14 and 15 years and set quite a few $1,000,000. And in turn, it's quite possible because of the nature of that curve, which is like a bowl inverted. How are we in time, David?
2 minutes.
It's like an inverted bowl.
Yeah, central tendency.
If you have a stock, say, trading at $1, and you've got some people who are bidding 90 cents, and you've got people on the other hand who are asking $1.10. Well, what's happening? There's a tendency for it to go towards that dollar, but if it goes down to 90, somebody may get out, or they may buy. You see, and you've got all these people making decisions on this, but their decisions are based on that bowl. And you know when it gets to the extremity of that bowl, the gravity is higher and it's going to come closer. And if you can watch and you can get your information on time, you can fairly well predict where it's going to go, and you can make decisions.
You can predict the short-term movement in the stock price.
Yes,
Yeah.
with a high degree of accuracy. It's not perfect,
Right.
because
But
there are
pretty
always
good.
aberrations.
Yeah.
But by and large, you likely can make more wins than losses. And it's all based, and could never been done without the modern computer and with all electronic trading. So here we have the prediction of the human behavior and verification of the prediction in a practical sense.
Yeah.
Because of my background in the FX market, this is slightly more appropriate in the FX market, and I'm talking to them about assisting them to do something in that marketplace. Still coming down to what I was going to cover and didn't today, is that, David, my dream is still the same.